Something is moving through the skies above the Strait of Hormuz right now, something that has forced Iranian commanders to go completely silent, something that has scrambled emergency meetings inside the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And when you find out exactly what the United States just positioned over one of the most critical waterways on the planet, you will understand why Iran is not just nervous. Iran is terrified. This is not a drill. This is not a routine military exercise. What is unfolding above the Persian Gulf right now is a calculated, deliberate, and deeply strategic move. One that sends a message so loud, so clear, and so undeniable that Tehran heard it before the engines even warmed up. But here is what makes this story truly extraordinary. This deployment was not just about firepower. It was about something far more dangerous to Iran. It was about a message wrapped inside technology so advanced, so overwhelming, and so precise that the IRGC has spent years fearing the day it would arrive at their doorstep. That day is here. Let us go back to what triggered all of this, because nothing in geopolitics happens in a vacuum. Every deployment, every military repositioning, every strategic escalation has a chain of events behind it, and this one is no different. For months, tensions in the Persian Gulf have been quietly building, behind closed doors, behind diplomatic language, behind carefully worded statements. Iran had been pushing, testing boundaries, probing responses. The IRGC Navy had been growing increasingly aggressive near international shipping lanes. Drone activity near American assets had been escalating, and intelligence reports were painting a picture that Western officials found deeply alarming. Iran was not backing down. It was leaning in. The Strait of Hormuz, that narrow 21-mile-wide choke point between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, carries almost 20% of the world's entire oil supply. Every single day, tankers loaded with millions of barrels move through that corridor. If that strait is ever disrupted, global energy markets do not just shake, they collapse. Prices explode, economies destabilize, and the entire world feels it within days. Iran knows this, and Iran has always known this. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a geographic location, it is Tehran's ultimate leverage card. The one thing Iran can threaten that forces the entire planet to pay attention. But what happens when someone finds a way to neutralize that card entirely? That is exactly what Washington began planning. Quietly, methodically, with the kind of strategic patience that only a superpower can sustain. Because the response to Iran's escalating aggression was not going to be a hasty decision. It was going to be a statement, a permanent, unmistakable, and technologically superior statement. And so the deployment began. What the United States moved into position over the Strait of Hormuz is a combination of assets so layered, so integrated, and so overwhelming that military analysts described it as something the region has never seen before. This was not just one platform. It was a synchronized constellation of capabilities designed to see everything, intercept everything, and, if necessary, destroy everything. At the core of this deployment are advanced persistent surveillance systems, long-endurance unmanned aerial vehicles operating at altitudes that make them invisible to the naked eye, but capable of reading a license plate from the edge of space. These platforms do not just watch, they feed real-time intelligence into a networked battlefield architecture that connects every asset in the theater simultaneously. But surveillance was only the beginning. Here is where things take a serious turn. Alongside the surveillance layer came something that made IRGC commanders genuinely alarmed: electronic warfare platforms, sophisticated next-generation systems capable of blinding Iranian radar, severing communications chains, disrupting drone operations, and effectively deafening the IRGC's entire sensor network in the region. Think about what that means for a moment. Iran's strategy in the Strait of Hormuz has always relied on a few key pillars: fast attack boats that can swarm larger vessels, shore-based missile batteries capable of targeting ships at range, an extensive drone program that has been growing in sophistication and lethality, and a communication network that ties all of these elements together in real time. Now imagine that network going dark. Imagine Iranian commanders giving orders that never arrive. Imagine targeting systems suddenly seeing nothing. Imagine drone operators losing contact with their platforms mid-flight. Imagine the entire carefully constructed web of IRGC naval power simply ceasing to function at the moment it matters most. That is what electronic warfare dominance looks like. And that is precisely what just arrived over Hormuz. But what happened next changed everything. Because the United States did not stop there. Paired with the electronic warfare capability came the one platform that Iranian military planners have had nightmares about for over a decade. The platform that represents not just American technological superiority, but American willingness to project that superiority directly into Iran's backyard with zero apology and zero hesitation. B-21 Raider strategic bombers, the most advanced aircraft ever built. Stealth technology so refined that existing Iranian radar systems cannot detect them. Range so extraordinary that they can strike any target in the region and return to bases thousands of miles away without a single refueling stop over hostile territory. And payload capacity that transforms every sortie into a conversation-ending event. When Iranian intelligence confirmed what was operating overhead, the reaction inside the IRGC was immediate, not public, not visible, but real. Emergency sessions were convened. Communication between senior commanders spiked. Assets that had been positioned aggressively near the strait were quietly repositioned. The provocative naval exercises that had been escalating for weeks suddenly paused. Iran went silent. And silence from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is one of the loudest things in the world. What most people do not realize is that this deployment carries a significance that goes far beyond the immediate tactical situation. It is not just about deterring Iran today. It is about redefining the entire strategic calculus in the Persian Gulf for years to come. For decades, Iran's power in the region has been built on asymmetric leverage. Tehran cannot match American conventional military power directly. No one can. But Iran has never needed to. The IRGC doctrine has always been about making any conflict so costly, so messy, and so unpredictable that even a superior adversary would hesitate before engaging. Proxy networks spread across multiple countries. Sleeper cells positioned near critical infrastructure. Missile arsenals capable of reaching American bases throughout the region. Fast boats ready to turn the Persian Gulf into a chaotic killing ground that disrupts global oil markets overnight. This is the Iranian playbook, and it has worked. For decades, it has forced American planners to calculate carefully before acting. It has given Tehran room to maneuver, to push, to escalate without triggering a full response. But that playbook was written for a different technological era. And what just arrived over Hormuz was written specifically to make that playbook obsolete. The layered deployment does not just address one element of Iranian strategy. It addresses all of them simultaneously. The persistent surveillance eliminates the element of surprise. Iran cannot mass forces, position assets, or coordinate operations without being seen in real time. Every movement becomes known before it becomes a threat. The electronic warfare capability strips away Iran's ability to coordinate that asymmetric response. Fast boats without communication are just boats. Missile batteries without targeting data are just expensive infrastructure. Drones without operators are just falling metal. And this strategic bomber presence answers the question that every Iranian commander has to ask themselves before ordering any action. What is the cost of escalation? What happens if this goes further? What is waiting on the other side of this decision? The answer is now parked directly overhead. Invisible? Patient? Absolute. There is another dimension to this story that rarely gets discussed. But it may be the most important part of all. This deployment did not happen in isolation. It happened in the context of a broader regional realignment that has been quietly reshaping the Middle East's security architecture. American allies in the Gulf have been watching Iran's escalation with deep concern. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain. These are nations whose entire economic existence depends on the safe passage of oil through the Strait of Hormuz, and they have been pressing Washington, privately and persistently, for a stronger deterrent posture. What they got was stronger than anything they asked for. The message sent to Riyadh and Abu Dhabi was just as deliberate as the message sent to Tehran. America is here. America is committed. And the technology. America is bringing to this fight is not the technology of 10 years ago. It is not the technology of yesterday. It is the technology of tomorrow, deployed today, because today is when it matters. Regional partners who had begun hedging their bets, quietly exploring accommodation with Iran, suddenly found the equation shifting under their feet. When the most advanced military capability on the planet is physically present above the most critical waterway in your neighborhood, geopolitical hedging becomes a very different calculation. Back in Tehran, the silence has not been total. It never is. Iranian state media began running carefully crafted narratives almost immediately. The deployment was characterized as provocative, as destabilizing, as evidence of American aggression, all the familiar language, all the expected framing. But behind that public messaging, something very different was happening. Iranian officials with direct connections to the negotiating track began making quiet contact through intermediary channels. The kind of back-channel communication that only happens when a government realizes that the situation has shifted in ways it did not anticipate and cannot easily reverse. Because that is the nature of true deterrence. It does not announce itself loudly. It does not demand acknowledgement. It simply exists, undeniable, unavoidable. And so overwhelming in its implications that the rational response, for any adversary capable of rational calculation, is to stop pushing and start listening. Whether Iran is capable of that calculation right now is the central question hanging over the Persian Gulf. Here is what we know. The Strait of Hormuz remains open. Global oil markets have registered the deployment with a quiet stabilization of prices that analysts described as a confidence signal. American naval commanders in the Fifth Fleet have publicly confirmed heightened operational presence in the region without detailing specific assets or capabilities. And the IRGC has not conducted a single provocative naval exercise in the week since the deployment began. That last point deserves to be read again. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the organization that turned aggressive posturing in the Persian Gulf into its signature behavior, the force that has harassed international shipping, seized tankers, fired missiles at American bases, and built an entire strategic identity around controlled escalation, has been quiet. Not because they want to be, because they have looked at what is overhead and made a very clear-eyed assessment of their options. But this story is far from over, and that is the part that no one should miss. Because deterrence is not permanent. It is not a solution. It is a condition that requires constant maintenance, constant credibility, and constant willingness to follow through on the implicit promise that sits behind every deployment of this kind. Iran is not retreating. Iran is recalibrating. There's a profound difference between those two things. A nation that retreats accepts defeat. A nation that recalibrates is searching for a different angle of approach, a different leverage point, a different moment. And Tehran is very patient. The nuclear program has not stopped. The proxy network in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen has not been dismantled. The long-range missile development continues. The ballistic weapons that do not need to pass through the Strait of Hormuz to reach American allies are still being produced, still being improved, still being positioned. Iran's strategy has always operated on multiple timelines simultaneously. The short-term tactical pause above Hormuz does not erase the long-term strategic ambition that has been driving Iranian foreign policy for over 4 decades. What just happened over the Strait of Hormuz is significant, genuinely historically significant. It represents the most decisive demonstration of American technological military dominance in the Persian Gulf in a generation. It sent a message that every government in the region received, processed, and is now responding to in ways that will shape the next chapter of Middle Eastern geopolitics. But the chapter after that one is still being written, and somewhere in Tehran, in rooms that no camera will ever see, men who have spent their entire careers thinking about American power, planning against American power, and dedicating their lives to surviving American power are already working on the next move. The question is whether Washington is ready for it. The question is whether the deployment above Hormuz is the beginning of a sustained strategic posture or a temporary signal that will eventually fade. The question is whether deterrence holds, because if it does, the Strait of Hormuz remains open. Oil flows. Markets stabilize. And the world continues turning in the uneasy, fragile way it always has. But if it does not, if miscalculation happens, if a moment of aggression triggers a response that triggers a counter-response, then the 21-mile-wide choke point that handles 1/5 of the world's oil supply becomes something very different. It becomes the place where everything changes. The skies above Hormuz are quiet tonight. But quiet is not the same as peaceful. And the technology circling overhead in the darkness is a reminder that in this part of the world, the most important battles are often the ones that have not happened yet. Watch this space, because what comes next will define the Persian Gulf for a decade, and it is already beginning.